Hey, thanks for joining me for Broadband Deployment News. Today I'm going to go back part two for the video that I was running last time on it was basically a Senate hearing on the broadband infrastructure bill, and I've got some clips where I've clipped out some of that, trying to make it a little bit easier on you so you don't have to watch the whole thing. So I'll be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here, Broadband Deployment News. So there was a hearing held February 1st with Secretary Raimondo, head of the Department of Commerce. And in that, there were some senators in this subcommittee asking her questions about the broadband infrastructure bill that was recently signed into law. And I thought there was some really interesting questions and comments. And I did part one of that on Friday. And today I'd like to go into that further. So let's look at, I'm going to start here with, I think it's Senator Murkowski, and I'll stop at times and make comments on some issues here, some things that I think are interesting.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Good to see you. Thank you for all you are doing and for being so responsive on so many of the issues that we've had discussions about. So you're talking about the mapping and the last
Not sure why it
mile,
froze here.
as we have had many discussions in Alaska. So much of our concern is with middle mile infrastructure. And we've got good support within the infrastructure bill, $1 billion to deploy middle mile projects. So we're excited about that. But a couple questions on that, one specific to the mapping.
So she's talking about middle mile because, as she's saying, Alaska is kind of a different kind of state, as you can imagine. So she's focused on middle mile. And this is another concern that she's going to bring up about mapping. So we've seen a couple of senators bring up this concern as well. So it's obviously something that they're all thinking about.
I've got a little bit of concern about the mapping requirements versus the timeliness of getting the funds out the door. Everyone wants to get the money out the door, but making sure that we have actually accurate maps, I think, is going to be critical, particularly for us in ensuring the intent of the law to serve the unserved before the underserved is met. And so it's going to take, we think, a little bit of time to do it right. We understand the urgency, but what I'm hoping is that we can get some assurance that NTIA is going to be sensitive to the diverse needs that we have in different states to get to the right solutions here. And maybe this requires a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of interagency coordination, but we would hope that you're understanding some of the challenges that we face in a state like Alaska.
Yes, I do. I mean, you and I have spoken about this. Alaska is unique. Having said that, most all these states are, but I understand the massive geography, the difficult topography, not that many people. We're not going to put the money out before we have the maps.
Okay.
We won't. We can't. As I said, there'll be the $5 million planning grant.
So she's reiterating there, and she said this before, that, and this is actually part of the infrastructure bill, is that they cannot really provide any funds for broadband deployment until the maps that we have are better, and they're not good now. So that's what the FCC is working on, and they've told her, Secretary Raimondo, in talking with Chairman Rosenworcel of the FCC, that the maps hopefully will be available by summer. But there's still a lot of work that's going to happen even besides the maps, but that's very important. And she's talking about a planning grant here. And in the infrastructure bill, there's $100 million for each state, kind of a pre-implementation kind of things. And then 5% of that can be used for planning. So that's where that $5 million is coming from. So each state is going to get $100 million. And then the U.S. territories are going to split $100 million. And that's the 5% or $5 million that she's talking about here.
And we'll get to work, but we can't let the money flow until we have the maps.
So, and I appreciate what you have shared, but I also know that I'm going to have people back home that are going to be panicked because they're going to see other regions of the country that might be receiving awards first and figure, wait, we're going to get left behind again. What we want to be able to assure is we're moving with urgency. We're getting the accuracy that we need for this mapping. And again, we're paying attention to this middle mile.
Yeah, I understand. Well, we'll do more stakeholder engagement. I mean, I think there's no substitute for communication and continuing to communicate with the message that you say. I will say that you mentioned there's the $1 billion set aside for middle mile.
So there is $1 billion for middle mile infrastructure in this act, which doesn't seem like much considering there's $65 billion total for about $42.5 for deployment, and then there's about $14 billion for affordability. So there's a lot of money in there for broadband. There's $1 billion for middle mile, which doesn't seem like much, but that's what she's talking about there. And now she's about to say something that I never thought of, is that, well, I'll let her explain.
Which is true, but Alaska can choose to spend its BEAD money on middle mile as well. So if the Alaska broadband plan identifies middle mile as the biggest problem, I would expect they'll use much of their BEAD money to build out middle mile.
And one of the things about how this money is going to be distributed by a formula is the more unserved and underserved areas the state has, as far as population goes and in relation to other states, is going to determine how much money they get as far as the BEAD program goes. Now, obviously, Alaska's got some very difficult areas, as she was talking about topography-wise, but also fewer population. So I don't know how that's all going to work, because in addition to needing this middle mile infrastructure over a huge state where you've got very few people spread out in lots of different areas, I don't know how far that money is going to go as far as this middle mile money that they might be able to get allocated. And then they do have some real challenges on getting the last mile done, right? Because again, they've got just a huge state and small populations kind of spread out a lot. So they need lots of middle mile to connect these diverse areas, and then they're going to need to be able to get that last mile to their citizens. So it will be a challenge in Alaska.
Plus, like you said, the middle mile.
Let me turn to tribal broadband and the connectivity program. I'm going to submit for the record a letter that the Alaska delegation sent to you, Madam Secretary, regarding the Alaska-based projects that are under consideration for the tribal broadband connectivity. You mentioned that there was $980 million in funding. This program had over $5 billion in application by the deadline last September. We've got an additional $2 billion in funding through the infrastructure bill.
So what she's talking about there is there was about $1 billion in the Consolidated Appropriations Act that passed in December 2020, I believe it was. So that was part of the pandemic, the government's additional funds for pandemic relief, part of that act. So there was this $1 billion for tribal broadband, and now the bipartisan infrastructure bill has added $2 billion to that, and it's going to be assuming that.
But obviously, the need is extraordinary out there. So I'm hoping that you can answer just a few just procedural questions here. With the additional $2 billion that is coming for the TBCP, do projects that have already been approved for funding but haven't yet received any money, do they need to resubmit their applications? And if so, how are you communicating that with folks? Do you have additional staff that you've added? How are you letting people know about the availability here?
So we are still figuring out the specific answer to your question, which is, do they have to reapply?
Right.
I think there's a lot of sense in making them not reapply for the reasons that you said, but we're going through it, and I'll have an answer shortly. We think we're going to have to hire over 100 people at NTIA to administer all of these programs. And as he said, there'll be a single point person on Alaska.
So you heard that there. So last time she mentioned that they're going to have a point person for each state. So the state of Alaska, the state of Maine, the state of Hawaii, the state of Georgia, there will be a person specifically working with that state at NTIA on administering all of this. And she's mentioned, so that'll be 50 right there, plus they'll probably have somebody for the territories, I would imagine. And then, all the other people or all the other duties or administrative things that they're going to have to do. So she's talking about 100 people there. So you can see, an act like this, just how the bureaucracy grows. Unfortunately, it's just kind of what has to happen. I would think you could handle I would think one person could handle multiple states. Maybe I'm wrong, but it does seem like bureaucracy takes over and you've got 100 people that are going to be adding to this department here.
So we're going to, we will have to stay in close touch with them. But you're right. I mean, I will say this, the 2 billion maps with the 1 billion. So the money is for the same kinds of things.
Right.
And so we're looking hard at saying you don't have to reapply and doing it on a rolling basis, which is what we're doing with the 1 billion.
That would be helpful if we can just be in contact on that. And I am assuming that you are coordinating with other federal agencies, whether it's USDA or others, who've also got broadband funding. As again, we had a lot of tribal set aside, so how we're working to make sure that everybody's in sync is important.
Yes, thank you. We have, so Mitch Landrieu is working in the White House. We have a task force on exactly this. I meet regularly with Tom Vilsack and Deb Holland. Our teams do to do what you're saying.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Along with the funding for broadband programs themselves, in the Infrastructure Act, we set aside funds for administering the programs. In fact, your response to Senator Murkowski about how many people you're going to have to hire underscores that. But if we have to live under a full year continuing resolution, how might this affect the rollout of the program?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in this particular program, I don't think that there will be huge disruption because the money has been funded, the $45 billion for the entire program. I will say, though, I appreciate the question because it would be very significantly disruptive to much of the rest of the work that the department does.
I thought that was a good answer, and that's not going to affect this much. I meant to cut out the second part of this answer, so I'm going to fast forward here and start here, I think.
In communities like Central Falls and Ponyville, and I could list too many more.
Now he's talking my language.
So he's mentioning specific communities in Rhode Island, and he's a senator from Rhode Island, and she is a former governor from Rhode Island. So that's her comment there.
I know. So how can programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program and the digital equity grants created by the Act help low-income families get connected and make the most of these connections?
Thank you for asking the question. Affordability is just as important as access, because what good is it to have broadband in your neighborhood if you can't afford it? What good is it if it's in the community of Central Falls, but there's no hookup to your, housing subsidized high-rise? It's no good. So we are very serious about affordability. First of all, every single ISP who receives any money from this must certify to us that they offer a low-cost plan. And we're going to define low-cost plan in a way to make sure it's really low cost. Now, the FCC has their affordability program that you mentioned, which is a $30 voucher. Mm-hmm. So as we define low cost, we know that means free for some people, so we're going to be looking at that $30 number.
So that's the Affordability Connectivity Program, and that is a $30 subsidy that the ISP can sign up to provide, and then consumers in their area can sign up to receive if they qualify based on their income, on certain income things, such as if they qualify for school lunches or other kinds of programs, then they can qualify for this affordable connectivity. So they can get up to $30 subsidy towards their internet service, and then they can also get up to $100 for a device like a tablet as part of that program. And the ISP actually then provides that service. And there's a requirement that the ISP have to make that $30 subsidy available on any plan they have. So it could be a low-cost plan, or it could be even their highest cost plan, but they would have to take $30 off of that. So what she's saying is the other part of the law is that every ISP or every service provider that's going to provide internet under this bill has to have a low-cost plan. Now, what does that mean? She's saying here, well, if they're getting a $30 subsidy, maybe that low-cost plan is a certain speed and it's free because they're getting $30 from the subsidy and they have to pay for it.
We're going to work very closely with the FCC to get that affordability program working. We're encouraging states to advertise it. And then on top of that, as you say, there are the digital equity grants. I think in a place like Rhode Island, which I happen to know very well, pretty much everyone has fiber. There's no rural Rhode Island. So
Block Island.
okay, fair enough. But
So she knows.
relative to Maine or Kansas. But in any event, I think the money will be used for providing hookups to the apartment building, providing computers for kids, providing laptops, providing digital literacy skills. And so I think all of that goes to affordability in a way that'll make sure this is not just accessible, but affordable.
Finally, quickly, what should the states and other entities that are going to be beneficiaries,
This is a good question.
what should they be doing now for successful applications?
They should be shoring up their broadband offices. Every state should be looking at their broadband office. They should be looking at their permitting policies to make sure that we can smoothly lay the fiber and do the construction work we need to. They should be thinking about job training programs. We're going to have to train a lot of people. We think we're going to create over 100,000 jobs across the country with this.
So right there, think about one of the challenges is there's so much fiber that's going to be built. There's not enough skilled people to be able to do that. So some of this money could be used by a state, for example, to, as she's saying, to create a training program for fiber technicians to show them, to train them how to go out and lay fiber, splice fiber, hook up subscribers, those kinds of things. So that would be a great use of that money.
They should be doing stakeholder engagement, going to Block Island and finding out what really are the issues. And they should be talking to us, calling us to ask questions so we can provide technical assistance.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First of all, Madam Secretary, welcome.
I just realized I probably loaded the wrong video, so I didn't cut some of this out. So I'm going to fast forward here, get through some of the pleasantries.
The committee, as we finalized the broadband provisions of the bipartisan infrastructure bill last year, I think the three of us spent endless hours negotiating, and it was indeed a pleasure to work with you. The state of Maine is ready to go, and the obstacle is an issue that's already been brought up by Senator Shaheen and others, and that is that the FCC must complete its overhaul of the broadband coverage maps, and that is really important because the current woefully inadequate FCC maps would lead to an inaccurate allocation of funding and overbuilding. The reason I'm concerned and signed a letter that the ranking member, Senator Moran, circulated is that the Treasury Department, which has jurisdiction over some of the American Rescue Plan broadband money, recently issued a final rule that removed a requirement that the funds be targeted to unserved and underserved areas.
So here's what she's talking about there. ARPA, that's the American Rescue Plan Act, originally was set to provide service to unserved areas. It was very specific. And then there were some interim rules that were sent out, and then the final rules, and it was changed in the midst because there were a lot of commentary from folks. So she's concerned about that. And here's what she's talking about. So here, this was the interim rule. The interim final rule limited eligible broadband investments to projects focused on delivering service to unserved or underserved locations defined as households or businesses that lack access to wireline connection capable of reliably delivering at least a minimum speeds of 25 meg down by 3 meg up. Now again, this is ARPA, so this is the American Rescue Plan Act. So this is not the Biden infrastructure bill. But again, this was changed. So this 25 by 3, that is what's considered unserved under the Biden infrastructure bill, or what they're calling the bipartisan infrastructure law or bill. So she's concerned that that's going to change, and you can see how it did change here. Let me scroll down to that. So the final rule Expands eligible areas for investment by requiring recipients to invest in projects designed to provide service to households and businesses with an identified need for additional broadband infrastructure investment. Recipients have flexibility to identify a need for additional broadband infrastructure investment. Examples of need include lack of access to a connection that reliably meets or exceeds 100 meg download and upload speeds. So that's way beyond the unserved element that was originally in the ARPA bill. And then recipients are encouraged to prioritize projects that are designed to provide service to locations not currently served by a wireline connection. Oh yeah, that reliably delivers at least 100 meg by download by 20 meg of upload speed. So they want them to kind of focus on the 100 by 20, and that's what's considered underserved in the infrastructure bill. So, what Senator Collins is concerned about is that some of these areas that are 25 by 3 may be overlooked, or somebody might be overbuilding. Certainly with ARPA, they might be overbuilding an area that's maybe got 50 by 50, but yet it's not 100 by 20. So that's her concern there. So I think I understand her concern and why she's
Can you
saying this.
give us an assurance today that federal funds that we provided through the bipartisan infrastructure bill will be prioritized to unserved and then underserved areas?
So again, the definitions in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, unserved is anybody that doesn't have access to at least 25 by 3. Underserved would be somebody that doesn't have access to 100 by 20.
I can. The bipartisan infrastructure law, which, as you say, we worked hard to negotiate, provides a crystal clear framework to prioritize unserved, then underserved. And so, yes, that is the way we will do it. Also, I share, you mentioned overbuilding. I mean, it is vital that we first get broadband to everybody. And we're going to do that so that we don't run the risk of, quote unquote, overbuilding and running out of money.
The committee before long.
So, and something she said, was it the other day? Or maybe she says it coming up here, but she does say at some point that we're going to make sure everybody that is unserved is served, and we're not going to overbuild. But it sounds like if there's money left, that she's okay with overbuilding because it helps competitive, it helps bring prices down. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
As well. Senator Coons.
And thank you, Senator Moran. As you can tell, Madam Secretary, this is a wonderfully collaborative committee that's gotten a lot of good work done under the leadership of both parties over the last couple of years. It's been a real joy to serve on the subcommittee. I'm grateful for your focused and effective leadership of the department at this moment of historic investment in making sure that Americans, Delawareans, Rhode Islanders, many others have access to broadband.
I have to second that. I said last time is that she seems very capable. She seems to have a real grasp of the situation, what's going on, and very capable. Seems to know she's able of answering all the questions that are within her purview. Now, if it's something related to FCC maps, she's also said, well, I'll need to get back to you on that, or I've been in touch with the FCC and we're working on that. So she does seem very capable.
Like the state of Rhode Island, Delaware has areas that I would argue are genuinely rural. Like Block Island. We have about 11,600 Delaware families that have no access to internet services, broadband at all. But we also have significant urban areas where affordability is the key issue. I look forward to staying in contact with you. You raised a number of issues: permitting and the permitting process in rural areas, skills for installers, servicers, and so forth, and how we're going to update that, and making sure that between what the department does and what FCC does, that we produce a result that is genuinely affordable. Let me just briefly ask, do you think making structural investments that reduce costs rather than providing monthly vouchers is going to be important to ensuring affordability for the long term?
This question doesn't really get answered because he doesn't follow up the question, but I think what he's saying there is we could provide an ongoing subsidy of $30 a month to help with affordability, but that's a temporary, that money will run out. So is there anything we can do structurally, maybe to bring prices down to make it more affordable?
I do. I think it's a combination. As I said, affordability is non-negotiable because if it's $100 a month for broadband, it might as well not exist. You can't afford it. I think it's hard to generalize because it's different in every place.
Yep.
So in some places, affordability fundamentally means laying the fiber and, subsidizing the companies to lay the fiber in places that it doesn't exist so that it will be affordable.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that. I couldn't agree more with our president's statement that the economy can't fully recover until all Americans can fully participate.
So that's true. What she said, in a sense, is true. Is that it's really expensive to get the fiber in the ground, but the problem is if that fiber is going to just a small number of customers, then you still have the issue, or maybe an area where economically a lot of people can't afford it. You still have that same issue. So I'm not sure structurally what they can change.
Making it easier to permit chip manufacturing here in America and making it tougher for China to access our technology.
I think I meant to cut this out.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, that's
you,
done.
Senator Schatz.
So this coming up, I forget what that other gentleman was. He wasn't talking about things related to broadband. Some of them are going into issues that are, I guess they're just in front of the Secretary of Commerce, and they want to cover a few things that are not necessarily related to broadband. So this next senator is from Hawaii.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for being here. I know that you understand the unique communications challenges that Hawaii in particular faces. We are the most isolated, populated place on the planet. And of course, we rely on submarine cables for connectivity to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. But also, we rely on submarine cables for connectivity within the state. And that's an important distinction to make as we think about definitions in the infrastructure bill and elsewhere.
So think about that. So yeah, they've got to get internet. You first got to get connectivity to the islands, one of the islands, and then you've got connectivity between each of the islands of Hawaii. So it is very difficult. You got Alaska on one end, difficult for some reasons, or different reasons, and you've got Hawaii, difficult for other reasons.
That's why Congress made sure that submarine cables are an eligible expense for middle mile broadband in the infrastructure bill. Can I count on you to work with NTIA and my office to meet Hawaii's broadband needs, which are understandably different, but sometimes take 3 or 4 extra minutes to explain?
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I was with Governor Ige this weekend. I spoke to the governors about broadband, and he brought this up specifically. And I expect that this will be in Hawaii's plan through the BEAD process, but absolutely, we will work with them.
Thank you very much. As Chairman of Indian Affairs, I appreciate that the department has been working hard to implement the first round of funding for the tribal broadband connectivity program, but there are still challenges in pushing the money out quickly enough and with the flexibility needed for the unique needs on the ground. What have you learned from the first round, and what can Congress do to ensure that funds in this coming round are issued as quickly as possible?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I acknowledge that we're a little bit behind on those tribal deadlines. But as I said to the chairwoman, our mantra is get it right. What have we learned? We learned that we had to cure about 70% of the initial applications from tribal communities, which means a lot of technical assistance, and that takes time. And so we're committed to doing that. We've learned how to do it, but it does take time, and we want to make sure if everyone's going to participate, we want to give the tribes a chance to get the money, which means we have to help them improve their proposals. Secondly, we've learned that you have to really do stakeholder engagement because the needs and conditions in tribes are just different. And so we have to get out in front of it and listen even more. I will also say on a personal level, I've learned just how heartbreaking this is. 50% of people on tribal lands have no broadband. And I've heard people tell me stories of a teacher having to get in her car and drive school worksheets once a week to the kids because otherwise they couldn't go to school at all. So we are very deeply committed to it.
Thank you. And I think a couple of thoughts. First, tribal consultation consultation with Native peoples because the people of Hawaii are not a federally recognized tribe, but still have trust obligations under federal law. But Native consultation is the key principle here, and it could be turned into a kind of TA, and that's fine. But it does seem to me that the consultation on the front end is both logistically smart, but it's also consistent with federal policy, which is to enable tribal consultation and the sort of nothing about me without me, and understanding that some of these tribes have extraordinary resources and no problem to apply for a federal grant. Some of them don't. Some of them, the librarian is the sheriff, is the, and people are trying their very best to do multiple jobs in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. So I appreciate your attention to that.
So I thought that was interesting, having both Alaska and Hawaii represented there in some of the questions. And again, a lot of the questions, I'm seeing that there's a common theme there. Hey, Will, welcome. Thanks for watching. There's a common theme there. You can see lots of concern about FCC maps. And again, to reiterate there, no broadband deployment funds for actually putting broadband in the ground or in the air, however they're going to do it, can be released until those FCC maps are down to the address and we can determine who really has broadband, what's really unserved and underserved, what speeds there are, those kinds of things. So that's very important. And there's this concern about overbuilding. They want to make sure that that money goes to the unserved areas first, and that every single person in the United States who wants broadband can get it. And then you also have heard a lot about affordability as well. So it remains to be seen what they do about affordability. In addition to this $30 subsidy that's part of the Affordable Connectivity Program, what does that mean when she says every ISP that's going to participate in this has to have a low-cost tier? What does that mean? And do they determine what the price is going to be? Do they determine what the minimum speed? Is it going to be a minimum of 25 by 3 at a certain cost? So that remains to be seen. The NTIA will be getting out their NOFOs, or their Notice of Funding Opportunities, to the states sometime around mid-May. So I think there'll be more information about what that means at that time. So there's still, I think, some interesting information that I looked ahead on this hearing, that I'm going to do this again. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Tech Tuesday. So on Wednesday, I'll be looking through some more clips, and I'll present some more questions and answers. So questions from the senators and answers from Secretary Raimondo. I think it's very interesting to hear it right from her mouth, because she's in charge of the Department of Commerce, which is over the NTIA. And as I've said, she has a real handle on things. So it's great to hear her thinking on this as the NTIA tries to figure out how they're going to wrap their arms around this huge program. Thanks for joining me. If this was interesting or helpful, give me a like on the video. If you're not subscribed, make sure you click the subscribe button, and then once you make sure you click that, make sure you click the little bell to make sure that you are then notified when I'm live or when we post a video. So that's it for today. I'll see you for Tech Tuesday if you join me then. Otherwise, I'll see you on Wednesday for part 3 of this series. Thanks. Bye-bye.